So today, I thought I will share 5 mistakes that I still feel bad about in my consulting and coaching career. And I will say right off the bat that I would like to pretend otherwise, but all of these mistakes, I think, are not mistakes I've only made once. These are sorts of mistakes, types of mistakes that unfortunately I've repeated a few times with my clients, and I would like to say that nowadays it doesn't happen anymore or a lot less often, and yet each one of those mistakes I believe is something that might apply to you, and just hearing how I think about it, how I processed it, how I worked with it with my clients might help you realize something that you're missing right now and can start working on even if you don't have someone like me beside you. And the first mistake that still haunts me till this day is not placing a mirror in front of people sooner. And this often doesn't happen when I'm working with people, but when there's this situation where sometimes people want to work with me, but also maybe aren't ready or don't have the budget, and I end up talking to them every 6 months or so. And oftentimes when this happens, I'm genuinely intrigued to hear how people are progressing, and I might ask them, what's new, what are you working on, what are your issues, what are your challenges? And sometimes I find that people seem to be repeating the same description through the years. I can literally talk to someone over 3 years, and they always repeat the same sort of problems. Now, the business actually changes usually because it's very rare for a startup to be in the same position for 3 years, but when it comes to their own skills, their own personal issues, the issues that they're seeing with their direct reports, etc., those seem to be repeating themselves. And earlier in my career, I sometimes would have just nodded along and was okay with it. And I feel really bad because sometimes there came a point where I would talk to someone and I would realize that what I'm thinking in my head as they're describing their situation is, oh my God, this is the same thing a year later. I mean, what a waste of a person's life, not having made enough progress in something. And these people usually they understand the issue, but perhaps because they are constantly in it and not like me having checkups every few months, they maybe feel like it's okay or it's normal, and I, as a bystander, I noticed that, oh my God, they're not making any progress. And I feel really bad about it because some of the times where this has happened, when eventually we start working together, we saw improvement really, really fast, or otherwise, in some scenarios, that person ended up leaving, ended up being fired, ended up being in a startup that really failed, and I feel like I maybe could have helped them if I had placed that mirror in front of them. And this is something that I think is critical, and partly if you follow what I write and what I share, I keep talking about chutzpah, about saying the things you think you ought not say, because we are treating each other too nicely, but that niceness means that we're not giving each other the sort of feedback we need to sometimes snap out of it. So that's mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is sometimes settling for that person's current motivation or goals, not pushing people for more. Sometimes what we work on together is genuinely as fast as that person can go. But other times I realized that I wasn't happy with the progress the client was making. I thought they could have made more progress or could have had higher expectations of themselves or of their teams. And sometimes I just thought to myself, well, the client is really happy. What does it matter that I, in their shoes, would have tried to get something more? They're happy. They give me, great testimonials, great ROI, but I was okay, and even if I wasn't okay with it, they're okay. They're the clients. That's what matters, right? And I still think, to an extent, that this is true, as in, I shouldn't compare what I can do to what my clients can do, and it's always easier, being an outsider, to think that I could have done better, or it is possible to do better. And yet, I've seen how sometimes when we worked together for a while and they saw enough improvement and they were happy, that was fine for them. But in my mind, I knew X, Y, and Z. And sometimes whenever I stop working with someone, be it after 3 months, 6 months, a year, it doesn't matter, I write up points that I think these are the things you need to be placing attention on over the course of the next year or so, because those are my thoughts about the sorts of issues I think might be coming up in the future for them, and I want to give them this sort of brain dump. And sometimes when I do this and we talk again a year later, I realize that all the things I had laid out were in fact straight on to the point, and they ended up really failing because I didn't push them sooner. Again, I'm taking the blame for things that are not entirely my blame, but I still believe that had I tried to push them a bit more or make them realize that getting more done doesn't mean that, you know, they are at the top 1% and we're trying to get a little bit more. No, it's just generally a healthy improvement that should be possible. It's not something that's unheard of. And in those scenarios, I think sometimes we need people to push us, especially if you're already a bit tired, especially if the people around you haven't had experience of working at very high impact teams, so they don't know it is possible to expect more of you and your organization. Or you've all been working so long together that you've all gotten used to a certain bar. And it's very hard to raise the bar without some sort of external factors helping you. So that's two. And I've seen, again, people who were stuck a year later on things that were clear to me a year earlier. And this is something that's always a waste, in my opinion. Startups don't get that many years to get things done, right? So we need to move faster. And if something was clear, we could have or either solve it or at least be better prepared for when it eventually came up. That's 2. 3, I wrote things, I'm looking at my notes as always in these videos, and I see that how I say things is a lot too harsh than how I can say it on YouTube and not be explicit. So 3 would be not pushing them to face the reality sooner. Sometimes I speak with people and I see that there's a mismatch. There's clearly a mismatch either between them and the team, either between them and their co-founders, between the company and what the market actually wants. There's something that to me feels like they're in denial. Now, I don't always have all the information. I'm an outsider. I only speak to them for a few hours a week. I'm not there in the trenches. So it might be that for me, this looks like a dire situation, but they have more context. But still, if I don't tell them, this looks really bad, or why do you keep doing this, or why don't you move on or switch positions or whatever, if I don't do this, sometimes I feel like there's this elephant in the room and I'm not sure they're even seeing it. And I felt like I've seen people go for years, literally years, in positions where they were suffering. They felt like every day was another slog and they weren't happy. And I'm like, this is just sometimes it's their choosing. They're co-founders of a company. Did you found a company to just suffer for a year? I don't think so. I'm not saying that startups are just rainbows and unicorns, but there's a vast difference between something being challenging and hard and sometimes suck, as opposed to this just sucks and we hate that. I don't think that should be the scenario. And through the years, there's been this, I noticed that there's been this improvement also in some people, but because of the recent changes in the market, and too many people think that this is not a good time to switch companies, to try and start a new startup, etc., we end up staying in a place that's not healthy for us for way too long. And a few years ago, I sort of decided that I'm always going to err on the side of just being too blunt and asking point blank, is this what you want to keep doing? If this is of interest to you, let me know in the comments. And I have this 2-minute thing that I do with people that has resulted in I'm guessing about a dozen people quitting or splitting up with their co-founders within a month after doing it, after they've usually been postponing it for years. And I'm not saying I'm trying to be a homewrecker. I'm saying that sometimes people need that clarity and push. So I've started doing that over the past few years, and I see how good it can be to finally have the tools and understand when you need to let go. And I think this is critical. Again, life is short. If you're wasting your life on years of doing something that you don't enjoy, what are you doing? Right? It's not a matter of, unless you are living paycheck to paycheck, this is not a matter of life or death. You can allow yourself to decide that something is not working out and find a different one. And I think that this is crucial for your well-being, for your family, and for your career in its entirety. It's okay to have some failures and some things that don't work out. This is how we learn. If we don't accept that, we're not going to learn enough, and that's the real waste. That's 3. Number 4, let's see. Not pushing people to provide better, concise, candid feedback much sooner, much faster. I sometimes would see people, especially first-timers, but not only, who would lament over months the situation as it is with someone they hired, with one of their peers. And the problem would be is that people would shy away from providing the actual feedback that we need to give. And when we do that, what we end up doing is we're landing a problem faster for so long till eventually it becomes an issue, till we reach the point of no return, and only then do we stop it. And I think that's not tenable. Sometimes we do that because we don't like giving feedback, because we don't want to be the bad cops, whatever. However, this is doing a disservice to yourself, to the people who are waiting to get that feedback, and to the team around you. And sometimes when we eventually did that, we saw how someone turned from a so-so or low-performing manager, for example, to a star in the company, sometimes literally within the span of a couple of weeks, because all that person needed was the right feedback, the right goals, seeing that someone was in the trenches with them, helping them get better, helping coach them, and not just letting them flail and seeing whether eventually, 1,000 monkeys on typewriter, they get it right. With the right guidance, sometimes people can flourish so fast. But we need to do that. And I allowed people to dilly-dally about the real feedback because I saw that it was hard for them, or because we had more pressing, more urgent issues to do. And this little bit of feedback is sometimes all it takes, and it also makes for a lot of things easier, because when we're not providing the right feedback, I feel like we're being dishonest with ourselves. It's like having a friend that you judge, you have something that's weighing on you, and you're never telling them the truth about what you think. That's not how you create a healthy relationship. And also, it always means that you have this extra process at the back of your mind, thinking about whether you're gonna say the actual thing you think, or you try and translate it something in some way. You try and work around their issues without letting them know that. That's not how we create high-performing teams. And lastly, number 5, is not demanding evidence. Now, it's very rare to have real evidence, like, the police trying to get, but when people tell me about something and I only hear it from them, it's very easy to just take it at face value. If John says that Jake is mean, bad, not being collaborative, doing politics, I might just accept that. However, sometimes we miss out on the fact that people might be doing things for other reasons, and not because of malice, not because they're incompetent. Maybe they have other issues, maybe they have something at home, maybe there's miscommunication, maybe you're stepping on their toes. I don't know, there might be so many different reasons. And when we just allow people to jump at conclusions and go with their first instincts without some questioning, we might allow them to take the wrong decisions, or assume the wrong things about people, sometimes again for months. And I ask for evidence because this can really snap people out of it. Sometimes their instincts are right, and just thinking about this makes them realize that they can act because they are right. That's fine. However, other times when we start talking about the issues, we can unlock whether, maybe I'm just assigning malice or bad intent or incompetence for something that I don't have the real evidence for. And maybe sometimes it's just about providing some feedback, like in the previous point, and that ends up unlocking better, healthier relationships. Maybe by going and looking at whether the trend really is getting worse over the past month, or is it just your feeling because you've been noticing it more. Check the data, look at your Giro, whatever. See whether you have more out of this quarter since you've replaced that director or not. Maybe it's just that director speaks up about it more. Looking at the data can really help us realize whether something is just our hunch and is a result of some bias, or is really something we can and should improve. Okay, so sometimes we need to ask for the evidence. You can do it with a coach again, or you can do it with yourself. Ask yourself, this is a bit of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Ask yourself, is this right, or is just my monkey brain thinking up things that aren't necessarily true? I have a bunch more of mistakes, unfortunately too much, so I'm not going to go into more in this video. But if you like this and you'd like to see part 2, again, let me know in the comments and subscribe so you won't miss out on it. Thank you, and I'm hoping I was able to help you realize one mistake and do a bit better, because again, life's short. Ciao.